Welcome back everybody. Today I'm going to go over my top 10 commander cards from Innistrad Midnight Hunt. Also, only a small percentage of my viewers are subscribers, so if you end up enjoying the video, consider subscribing. It's free and it helps out the channel a lot. For 1 colorless and 2 black mana, Mask of Grizzle brand is a legendary artifact equipment with an equip cost of 3 colorless mana. The equipped creature has flying and lifelink, and whenever equipped creature dies, you may pay X life, where X is its power. If you do, draw X cards. This definitely has a place in Sacrifice and Aristocrat decks. If you attach this to a creature and attack with it before sacrificing it, you could potentially gain the life you would need to pay for that card draw ability. My only concern with this card is how expensive it is to equip. The card reminds me a lot of Skull Clamp, but one of the main reasons that makes Skull Clamp so great is due to its cheap equip cost. For 2 colorless and 2 black mana, Giza Glorious Resurrector is a 4/4 legendary human wizard with, if a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. At the beginning of your upkeep, put all cards exiled this way with Giza onto the battlefield under your control. They also gain Decayed. This feels like a more fair Tergrid God of Fright, but unlike Tergrid, it only steals creatures. And since these creatures come in with Decayed, it's not too powerful. For 3 colorless and 2 blue, Leer is a 3/4 legendary human wizard with spells can't be countered. Each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard has flashback, and the flashback cost is equal to that card's mana cost. And remember that spells can't be countered part goes for both you and your opponent's spells. But even with that, I still think this card is really powerful, especially if your deck is heavy with sorcery and instant spells, because then it essentially turns your graveyard into an extension of your hand. And of course there are a lot of cards that work well with this card, especially since now they all have flashback. Ghouls Night Out is not only a great Misfits song, but it's also a pretty good Magic card. For 3 colorless and 2 black mana, Ghouls Night Out is a sorcery card that reads, for each player, choose a creature card in that player's graveyard, put those cards onto the battlefield under your control. They're black zombies in addition to their other creature types, and they also come in with Decayed. Stealing cards from your opponent's graveyards is always fun. But since they come in with Decayed, you ideally want to choose creature cards that have some kind of enter the battlefield effect or some kind of activated ability, because since these have Decayed, you can't really attack with them. I mean, you can, but then they would just immediately have to be sacrificed at the end of combat, and they can't block. For 3 colorless and a black mana, Praline Ice Catcher is a 2/4 human rogue creature that has, whenever you sacrifice another creature, exile it. If that creature was a token, put a +1/+1 counter on Praline Ice Catcher, and when Praline Ice Catcher leaves the battlefield, return each card exiled with it onto the battlefield under your control. So this is pretty great. You can actually use this to protect your creatures from some targeted removal. So basically if someone was going to target one of your creatures, you could just sacrifice it and it would be exiled due to Praline Ice Catcher. And then whenever Praline Ice Catcher is removed, it'll bring all those creatures back. Now, Praline Ice Catcher will be somewhat of a lightning rod on the table, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Because essentially, if they do target it immediately, you've just taken away a removal card from them, or if you've already sacrificed some creatures underneath it, you'll get all those creatures back when they do decide to remove it. The only downside with it is it does stop your creature's death triggers. Agar of Autumn is a 2/3 human druid creature for 1 colorless and 2 green. It has, you may look at the top card of your library anytime, you may play lands from the top of your library, and its Coven ability, as long as you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, you may cast creature spells from the top of your library. This card is very similar to Oracle of Moldea, but instead of playing with the top card of your library revealed, you can just look at the top card at any time. Also, the Coven ability to play creature cards from the top of your library is pretty strong, especially since green shouldn't have any issue reaching that Coven requirement. However, I did want to mention I do think Oracle is still better for landfall decks, since it does let you play an additional land on your turn. Next up is the dual land cycle for this set. I think this is a great alternative to those really expensive dual lands. The only downside is if it's turn 1 or 2, most likely this card will come in tapped. But those are the ideal times you'd want a land card to come in tap. I mean, it's not perfect, but if it was going to come in tapped, those would be the turns you'd want it to come in tapped. But the fact that you basically have a dual land from that point on for the rest of the game is just really strong. And I think these lands are an easy include in any deck that uses these colors. For X colorless and 2 black mana, the Meathook Massacre is an enchantment that reads, when the Meathook Massacre enters the battlefield, each creature gets -X until end of turn. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life, and whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you gain 1 life. Essentially, just a better Black Sun Zenith. It gets around indestructible cards like Avacyn Angel of Hope. Not only can it be used as a board wipe when it enters the battlefield, but it also is just a great enchantment in general. I could see it being played for 0 colorless and 2 black mana just for the enchantment alone. I think any Aristocrats or Sacrifice deck would love to have it, but in general I think this card would be good in any deck that uses black mana. Vanquish the Horde is a sorcery for 6 colorless and 2 white, destroy all creatures. But it has this spell cost 1 less for each creature on the battlefield. Since it has a cost reduction on it like Blasphemous Act, you'll most likely be just playing this for 2 white mana. But what else can I say? It's just a really great board wipe. It's not like white needed another really great board wipe, but you know, we got one, so huzzah. Last but not least, Writeup Harmony is an instant for 1 white and a green. It reads, whenever a creature or an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control this turn, draw a card. It also has flashback for 2 colorless and a green and a white. I think what makes this card so great is that it works with tokens. For example, if you could play this card and then play something like Avenger of Zendikar, you could potentially be drawing a lot of cards. Or if your deck is heavy with enchantments, you could use something like Replenish, bringing back all those enchantments and then drawing a bunch of cards. But also, if you could combine this with some kind of infinite flicker combo, you could be potentially drawing your entire library or at least a whole bunch of cards. I did do a video on a budget flicker combo. Feel free to check that out in that little eye symbol at the top. Did I miss any cards that you think should have been on this list? Drop a comment below and let me know. And thanks for watching. Have a swell day.